We live in a world where computers are everywhere. In our pockets, on our desks, in the cloud. They fly airplanes, count our money, even predict the future. And it seems like it's always been that way. But it's not. Once upon a time, it was just a pipe dream, an idea that seemed more crazy than real. Imagine a man sitting in a small office, surrounded by the smell of ink and paper dust, trying to prove to the world that a machine can think too. He was called a freak, laughed at, even his friends turned their backs on him. And yet, he was the one who challenged the impossible. And here arises the question that we asked ourselves at the beginning of this story. What makes a person keep going when everything around him says stop? We will find the answer in the middle of this journey. But I promise, this story will not only be about cars. It is about you and me, about the power of dreams, about failures that become fuel, and about triumphs that change the whole world. We often imagine great inventions as lightning that suddenly splits the night sky. But in reality, they are born slowly, in silence, where there is no applause. And that's how the history of the computer began. Imagine 19th century London. The streets are bustling, carriages rumble on the cobblestones, the smell of freshly ground grain lingers in the coffee shops, and the clanking of metal is heard in the factories that sprout up around the city. This is an era of change. People are inventing new machines, building railways, dreaming of a world where everything will be faster and more precise. But in a small room, far from all this noise, sits one man. His name is Charles Babbage. In front of him is a table littered with papers. On the sheets are endless rows of numbers, formulas, drawings. In the air is the smell of candle and ink. And in his head is an idea so bold that even his closest friends twiddle their fingers at their temples. Babbage dreams of creating a machine that will calculate on its own, a machine that will save man from routine errors, from boring tables that were then calculated manually. He would call it the analytical engine. Now that sounds simple. But imagine, at that time, no one could even think that iron could think. His idea looked like the fantasy of a writer, not a serious scientist. And here comes the question we asked ourselves at the beginning. What makes a person move forward when everything around them says stop? For Babbage, it was faith. He saw a world that others could not yet imagine. He saw a time when the human brain would stop spending hours on mechanical calculations and focus on creativity. He believed that the machine could become man's friend, not his enemy. And that faith kept him going even when the world did not understand. But the beginning is always difficult. In his first experiments, gears broke, mechanisms jammed, projects collapsed under their own weight. Investors lost patience. Officials said, "This is a waste of money." The newspapers wrote that Babbage was a dreamer chasing a ghost. And, perhaps, it was then that a doubt arose in his heart. Maybe they are right? Maybe I really am wasting my life on something that cannot be created? But you know what's interesting? There's this moment in every great story. The moment when the hero almost gives up, when all roads lead nowhere. And that's when true strength is born. Because if you move forward not because of applause, but despite silence and criticism, then your dream is stronger than fear. Babbage didn't stop. He continued to sketch, to improve, to invent. And although he never saw his machine in its finished form, he lit a spark. And that spark would be picked up by others, those who would come after him. Alan Turing, John von Neumann, dozens of scientists who would turn the illusory dream into reality. But in the beginning, there was him, a man with a strange idea and a firm belief that the world can be changed. And that is the real magic of the beginning. It is always quiet, imperceptible. But someday, in decades, we will call it a revolution. Every great dream has a price, and often it is much higher than we are willing to pay. Charles Babbage understood this very quickly. Imagine a boardroom in 19th century London. The walls are covered in dark wood. The air smells of cigar smoke. Serious officials and investors sit around a long table. They listen attentively to Babbage, who talks passionately about his machine, about how it will change the world of science and manufacturing. He speaks with fire in his eyes, painting a future in which man does not drown in numbers, but creates. But their faces are skeptical. Some sneer, some raise an eyebrow coldly. One of them quietly says, "Mr. Babbage, do you want us to spend public money on a mechanical fantasy?" At that moment, his heart sinks. He realizes that convincing them will be harder than building the machine itself. Funding begins to melt away. Some refuse outright. Others disappear, leaving him alone with unfinished drawings. And even those who still believe demand results immediately. But how to give a result if the technology itself is just being born? And here the real crises begin. The machine he is designing turns out to be extremely complex. Gears break, parts don't fit together. The engineers he has hired are losing patience. Some are leaving. Screams can be heard in the workshop, doors slamming, the sound of metal falling to the floor. This doesn't sound like a road to revolution. This sounds more like a road to nowhere. One evening, he is left alone. There is a broken part on the table, his hands smell of grease, his eyes burn from lack of sleep. And the thought goes through his head. Maybe I am wrong? Maybe they are right. This is impossible. Here it is, the moment when a dream almost dies. Not from a lack of ideas, but from the weight of doubts. Because the inventor's greatest enemy is not criticism or a lack of money. It is the inner voice that whispers, "Stop. You are wasting your life." But it is at this moment that a ray of light appears in his story. He is supported by a few close people. One of them was Ada Lovelace, a woman of incredible intelligence who saw in his drawings not chaos, but opportunity. She realized that the analytical engine could do more than calculate. It could follow instructions. It could become universal. Her faith becomes its fuel. She writes her famous notes, in which the idea of programming first appears. And although the world is not yet ready to accept it, it is here that a new dimension is born, not just a machine for calculating, but a machine for thinking. But even with this support, the crises do not disappear. Officials cut funding. The newspapers laugh. The crazy professor with the iron toys. His name becomes synonymous with failure. And one day, when his project is finally stopped, he feels that his dream is shattered into pieces. Imagine this scene. A dark room, drawings scattered on the floor. The silence is so profound that only the ticking of the clock can be heard. Babbage sits, bent over his desk, and asks himself, "What if my life has really been wasted?" This was his lowest point. And at the same time, a turning point. Because a crisis always either breaks or hardens. And here we see what will become the main lesson of his story. Even when a dream does not come true in your life, it can become a seed for the future. Babbage did not see his computer, but his ideas did not disappear. They remained in books, in drawings, in the hearts of a few loyal followers. And they will pass the baton to those who come after. When we think of great discoveries, it's easy to imagine gleaming labs, cheering halls, and winners' laurels. But the truth is, most of the journey is made up of dark corridors of doubt. And that's where the greatest ideas are born. He worked day and night. The machine he was building resembled a monster of metal and wood. Gears, levers, endless schemes. He could sit for hours at the drawings, and then suddenly look up and realize, it's night, and he hasn't even eaten. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was getting home. Because emptiness awaited him at home. His wife, who had once supported his dream, now increasingly reproached him. You spend your time on the hardware, not on your family. The children, who wanted attention, saw him only at breakfast, and then with a tired face, his thoughts still somewhere among the mechanisms. It hurt him to admit it, but he was losing touch with those for whom he had once wanted to make the world a better place. This was his biggest personal problem, the balance between dream and life. Sometimes he asked himself, what if they were all right? What if I was wasting years? After all, while he was drawing cars, the world moved on. Others were making money, building careers, throwing parties. And him? He lived in a fog of uncertainty. And yet, every time he touched the drawings, he felt the same spark in his hands. A spark that said, "This is important. Don't give up." But the temptation to stop was great. Some nights he would sit on the studio floor, hunched over with fatigue, feeling like he was about to break. And then the question that tormented him the most was this: is it possible to be true to a dream without betraying those you love? He began to doubt not only his ideas, but also himself. There were times when he looked in the mirror and saw not an inventor, but a man who had failed his family. It gnawed at him from the inside. And although he continued to work, he went to bed every night with the same ache in his heart. But perhaps it was this struggle that made him stronger. Because the truth is, dreams always require sacrifice, sometimes too much. And he had to decide, was his dream worth the price? We know that it is in this struggle that the most powerful breakthroughs are born. Because when a person stands between their personal life and the call of their heart, that is when they make a choice that changes not only them, but the entire world. And then came the moment when silence and doubt began to give way to noise and excitement. After years of blueprints, broken gears, and personal sacrifices, a spark of true transformation appeared on the horizon. Laboratories began to fill with new technologies: valves, relays, wires that twinkled in the light of the lamps like little stars in a dark room. Here a new generation of inventors enters the arena. People who understood that Babbage's mechanical engine was only the first step. And among them is Alan Turing, who owns the idea of a universal machine. Imagine the scene: a room full of the roar of lamps and relays. On the tables, piles of wires. Laptops do not yet exist, only pens, drawings, and notebooks. Scientists conduct experiments, stop, write down, redo them again. And there is tension in the air, like before the first launch of a rocket. But the transformation is not limited to technology. It is in the way of thinking. Previously, a machine could only calculate according to a given formula. Now an idea emerges. A computer can follow algorithms, execute instructions, adapt to new tasks. This is no longer just a mechanical calculator. This is a new type of mind, an artificial mind, capable of changing the world. However, crises arise again along the way. Some lamps overheat, relays freeze, wires get tangled, and the results of calculations do not match. The team is again faced with a choice: to put everything aside and admit defeat, or to take a risk and continue. And here the main symbol of transformation appears, not only in the machines, but also in the leaders. Turing and his colleagues decide to take a risk. They stay in the laboratory at night, check every wire, every connection, and at one point the machine comes to life. Imagine the sound of relays clicking, the flickering lights, hearts beating in time with the mechanism. And for the first time, a computer performs a complex task. It calculates in minutes what would have previously taken weeks. This is a real breakthrough. And the world begins to look at this machine differently. It is no longer just a tool. It is a partner in the discovery of a new world. And the most interesting thing is that even at this moment, when technology is already changing history, man continues to remain at the center. Leadership, faith, courage, and determination. These are what make technology revolutionary. The machine itself does not change anything. The one who creates and leads it changes the world. And here comes the main lesson of this stage. A big transformation begins with a small but bold step. Sometimes it's one wire, one algorithm, one experiment. And if you're willing to take risks, if you're willing to lead, not follow, the world begins to change with you. We are on the threshold of the next stage, a global breakthrough, when computers will cease to be laboratory experiments and enter business, science, government, and everyday life. And then we will understand that everything that was born in the silence of small rooms can turn into a global revolution. And now comes the moment when an idea becomes a force that changes the lives of millions. Computers have ceased to be strange boxes with bulbs and wires. They have entered business, science, education, everyday life. Imagine the first time when a huge computer room became the heart of a bank, calculating millions of transactions in minutes, or the first laboratory where a calculating machine performed complex scientific calculations faster than any scientist could have imagined. These were the years of a real revolution. Tubes were gradually replaced by transistors, transistors by microcircuits, and huge rooms by personal computers on desks in homes. The world no longer waited. It rushed forward with new force. And it was then that Babbage's idea came to life in full. The machine became not just an assistant, but a partner of man. But this breakthrough was not smooth sailing. The first companies to launch personal computers faced technical challenges, consumer skepticism, and fierce competition. Imagine the early meetings, engineers arguing, markets not ready, investors nervously checking numbers, and thousands of imperfect prototypes lying on tables. Any failure could have stopped the entire revolution. But this is where true leadership stories are born. People who saw the potential, took risks, invested money, time, and reputation. They didn't wait for approval. They took steps forward, learning from the experiences of previous generations. And so, one by one, companies began to produce computers that people could hold in their laps, take home, and work with every day. We can imagine the scene: a small office, and on the desk is the first home computer. People sit around, pressing buttons, watching the screen come to life. The numbers appear instantly. There is excitement and awe in the air. They hold the future in their hands. And this future becomes a reality for millions in the years to come. But the real magic of a global breakthrough is that it changes not only technology, but also consciousness. People begin to think differently, learn faster, create new businesses, open up new horizons of science. The computer becomes a symbol of the fact that a dream that once seemed hopeless and unrealistic can change the world. And that's the lesson. Breakthroughs don't happen overnight. They come after struggle, doubt, and small steps forward. Every prototype, every sleepless night, every investor rejection, all of this becomes part of the journey. And when we finally see the result, we understand. This is not just a victory of technology, but a victory of human faith, courage, and perseverance. Computers are changing the world. But it was those who believed in the dream, who didn't give up when everything around them said impossible,